the things about navigating the wilderness is you have to learn to go with the flow and work with the environment. I was looking at this river and how at one point looks pretty tame. Just down a few rocks, kind of a pool, and then all of a sudden it hits a drop off. And through the rest of the gorge, it's got a lot of energy, a lot of rocks to navigate.
My first year in youth ministry, I was excited to introduce some junior hires to the Boundary Waters. My first group had 4 7th grade boys. So we headed up to Wilderness Canoe Base, a Lutheran camp on the end of the Gunflint Trail on Seagull Lake. And myself, a 24-year-old youth director, and a college-age guide, and 4 boys set out for the Boundary Waters canoe experience. The evening before, we'd gotten into camp and we prepared all of our supplies. We had a short training, and then we reviewed our route. The next morning, with the sun shining bright, it wasn't long before we were in our canoes and our canoes were in the water. The energy was high, and we were on our way. Now, if you haven't been to Seagull Lake, it is a very large lake. It's about 5 miles from one end to the other. And in the midst, there's a lot of islands, and the shoreline is really rugged. It's a bit of a tricky one to navigate, especially when it's your first lake on your first Boundary Waters trip. But as we left camp, we were ready to go. We were heading out into the big part of the lake, and all of a sudden it hit us. The wind. Tucked behind this island at the camp, we'd been sheltered from this tremendous force. But now out on the big body of the lake, we were fully exposed. With a group of novice canoers, this was going to be a rocky start to our adventure. Each of us put our heads down and had to make our way, each canoe, to the other side of the lake. My canoe, we tried a little zigging and zagging. The other canoe, they tried to go across to the shore and hug the shoreline. And the other canoe, I'm not sure it had any strategy at all. But somehow, we all made it to the other side of Seagull Lake. In the bay on the other side of the lake, we were facing the shoreline looking for our first portage. I, however, couldn't see it. I looked to the canoe guide. Can you see it? She couldn't find it, and the boys couldn't find it either. Floating in the bay, we were relieved to have made it through this wind without capsizing any canoe. But somehow we had to find the next stage of the journey. So we got out our maps and we compared the maps to the shoreline, but something wasn't quite right. Our journey of faith can often feel like this experience on Seagull Lake. We're excited and we head out only to discover we're not really prepared. As our enthusiasm fades, we press on, facing obstacles one by one. Maybe our confidence grows a little bit only to have another obstacle come in front of us. It's easy to get disoriented in unfamiliar territory. My experience in Seagull Lake made it clear that our group had much to learn about navigating this wilderness experience. Today's contemporary world can feel a little bit like navigating a new wilderness experience. In our world, we're taught to be suspect of the unknown and to try and domesticate anything in unruly environments. Privileging safety and security, we are conditioned to try and control our surroundings and to mitigate risk. When unexpected conditions arise, this approach is tested and its limitations exposed. In this environment, we need a navigational system that allow us to take the twists and turns that come in this unexpected environment. In the wilderness, travelers need a reliable navigational system to go with their explorer's mindset. Traveling in the wilderness requires approaches that can recalibrate as the environment changes. They need a navigational system designed for dynamic stability. Two capacities are core for such a navigational system. The first is setting direction. A clear direction allows travelers to set a course, to create a plan, and then to make adjustments along the way. On that Boundary Waters trip, we knew we needed to get to the other side of Seagull Lake. It didn't matter how we got there, it mattered that we got there. While setting the direction has always been important, in today's dynamic environment, it is imperative. In wilderness environments, it's the traveler's responsibility to read this landscape and to know what direction they're headed. More of an art than a science. Setting direction is a key capacity for navigating dynamic environments. The second core capacity is getting oriented. Getting oriented is the ability to read the context and to put it in dialogue with that direction that you want to go. In familiar territory, we get oriented by relying on routes, common pathways, places where people have gone before, on reading those steady landmarks that have been placed strategically along the way. But in unfamiliar territory, that responsibility to read the landscape and to find the reference points are all on the traveler. Compasses are simple tools for wilderness travel. Used to get oriented, they help us work with the environment to read the signs. As the compass finds true north, that I can, as a traveler, get my bearings on where I am and locate myself in relationship to where I want to go. As 21st century environments become more unpredictable and less familiar, we need reference points and we need to learn to read the environment and to look for clues that can help us locate ourselves, get oriented in relation to where we want to go. Faith is a living, dynamic relationship with God, a relationship that God initiates and we are invited into. Faith is a gift given and received, a living, bold trust in God's grace. Transformed by God's grace and informed by God's promised future, faith forms us in our relationship with God, the one who created us and all of creation. We are formed as we encounter God, others, and the world. Loving God and our neighbor, that's the compass that orients. And God's promised future, that's the direction of where we're heading with our lives. As people of faith, we accompany each other in discovering a Christian way of life in this dynamic environment. Forming faith is not about creating church or getting more members or raising model Christians. It's about a pattern of being and doing and thinking that as our human communities share together, we help each other make meaning of our lives and the world. You see, faith formation is about a way of life that sees our encounters in the world as vital for our relationship with God and loving our neighbor. Discovering a Christian way of life in today's highly dynamic environment is our journey of becoming. In highly dynamic environments like the one that we live in today, getting oriented is a never-ending task. Because so much of the environment is constantly changing, locating ourselves and where we are in relationship to the direction of the future that we're headed is an ongoing activity. With loving God and our neighbor as our compass, we must learn to work with the environment or go with the flow. Like paddling rapids or navigating the twists and turns of whitewater, we work with this disruptive forces to find dynamic stability. A navigational system designed for dynamic stability must be agile and adaptable. but it also must be accessible and portable. Like the GPS on my Google Maps when I was doing hashtag bike MN52. It can reorient us no matter where we are. Christians need a GPS-like system to navigate the complexities of today's world. I believe there are 2 movements and 4 commitments that become a GPS for our discovery journey today. A Christian way of life has always had 2 foundational movements: gathering and scattering. Gathered in community, we discover our identity as children of God through participating in Christian practices, encountering God's story, and cultivating relationships with other people of faith. And scattered in the world, we participate in God's mission as we celebrate difference, name pain and injustice, and as we love and serve others. Any approach to a Christian way of life must take into account these 2 movements. Faith is multidimensional. There are 4 things that summarize this multidimensional nature of faith: gift, compass, witness, agent. Faith is a gift of love. Ephesians 2:8 says this, "For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. This is not your own doing, it is a gift from God." As a gift, faith anchors our lives, and it also transforms us into subjects of God's love. Faith tells us who and whose we are, as it ignites us on this becoming journey. Discovering and rediscovering faith as a gift is so vital on our journey of faith. Faith is a compass that directs our lives. Ephesians 4:1 says, "Live a life worthy of the calling of which you have received." As an embodied faith, God's loved and promised future help guide our actions and our relationships. Faith's orienting capacity helps us see God's presence around us and join in God's mission in the world. Discerning our actions in light of God's activity and our present circumstances, that is part of this discovery journey. Faith witnesses to a peculiar story, in particular, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Just like the first century church, we too are called to witness to this story. Christians are formed by this peculiar story, a story that helps our hearts and our minds not only know God, but deepen our ongoing relationship with this God. As we confess our belief in the resurrected Christ, we join the apostles in extending faith not only to this generation, but to future generations to come. As we share our stories of faith, we witness to God's ongoing activities in the world. Learning God's story and sharing our stories of faith is part of this discovery journey. Faith creates agents of God's love. Faith moves our attention off of ourselves to our neighbors. Sent into the world, we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making God's appeal to love the world through us. Transformed by God's love, we scatter in the world to love as God loves. We create, redeem, and sustain life as we employ our gifts and we extend God's love in the places that we live and dwell. As we love the unlovable, welcome the stranger, feed the hungry, befriend the lonely, expose evil and mend brokenness, God's promised future breaks into the now, and we see the world as God sees it. Discovering how to join God in this mission of creatively and redemptively loving the world is part of our discovery journey. And what about our adventure on Seagull Lake? Well, we stepped back. We tried to locate ourselves. And as we did, we discovered that the landscape and our map didn't match. we had got disoriented. What we thought was north was east. Returning to the basics, we were reminded of our underdeveloped skills. But we also learned we could recalibrate. As we found our way to the portage and made our way to the next lake, we were excited for this journey ahead and where God would take us.